The stars looked different through the cracked viewing screen of the Exodus Dawn. Captain Vreltha pressed her three-fingered hand against the control panel, watching the red warning lights flash across every system. The colony ship groaned around her, metal screaming as the damaged hull struggled to hold together. Behind her, the bridge crew worked in silent desperation, their blue skin pale with exhaustion. 50,000 Javari souls depended on what happened in the next few hours. 50,000 refugees from a dying world, packed into a ship that was falling apart around them. The navigation system had failed 3 weeks ago during the emergency jump. The drive core was barely functional. Life support was counting down its final hours of operation. "Captain, I'm detecting radio signals," the communications officer said, his voice thin with hope. "Primitive broadcasts, but consistent. There's a populated world ahead." Vreltha felt her chest tighten. They were supposed to reach an empty world, a place where the Javari could start again without interference. But the malfunction had thrown them across space, and now they were approaching an inhabited system. Protocol demanded they avoid contamination of less advanced species, but protocol also didn't account for 50,000 people dying in the void. "What kind of signals?" she asked. "Entertainment broadcasts, communication networks. The species appears to be in early space-age development. They call their world Earth." The captain made her decision. "Send a distress signal. Universal standard. Make it clear we're refugees, not invaders." On Earth, the message arrived at every listening station. Humanity had pointed at the stars. The translation was rough but clear enough. "A colony ship damaged, requesting emergency landing rights. 50,000 beings aboard. Life support failing. No hostile intent." The United Nations Emergency Council met within hours. The Security Council chamber filled with representatives from every major nation, their faces showing everything from wonder to fear to suspicion. The footage from orbital telescopes showed the alien ship clearly. It was massive, easily 5 times larger than anything humanity had ever built, but it was also dying. Atmosphere vented from hull breaches. The engine section glowed red with uncontrolled heat. Debris trailed behind it like a comet's tail. "They could be lying," the Russian ambassador said. "This could be an invasion force." "An invasion force that's falling apart?" The Brazilian representative countered. "Look at that ship. They're barely holding together." Dr. Sarah Chen sat in the observer section, her heart pounding. She had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, studying theoretical models of first contact, learning linguistics and cultural anthropology. She never thought it would actually happen. Now it was happening, and humanity had hours to decide. The Chinese ambassador spoke carefully. "If we allow them to land, we cannot control where their technology goes. Every nation will want access. This could destabilize everything. If we don't allow them to land, we're murderers," the Kenyan ambassador said flatly. 50,000 people will die while we watch. Is that who we want to be when we meet the galaxy?" The debate raged for 3 hours. Dr. Chen watched the clock, knowing that every minute brought the alien ship closer to complete failure. Finally, the Secretary General called for a vote. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Earth would attempt a rescue. Dr. Chen found herself on a shuttle heading to orbit 12 hours later. She was part of the first contact team, along with linguists, doctors, engineers, and a small security detail. As they approached the Exodus Dawn, the scale of it overwhelmed her. The ship was ancient and beautiful, covered in flowing designs that looked like frozen water. It was also clearly dying. The airlock connection was shaky, but it held. Dr. Chen stepped through into an alien corridor, and her breath caught. The architecture was all curves and organic shapes, nothing like human right angles. The lighting had a purple tint. And standing before her was a Javari. He was tall and thin, his blue skin covered in subtle patterns. 3 eyes blinked at her, arranged in a triangle on his face. He wore robes that might have been elegant once, but were now stained and torn. When he spoke, the translation device on her collar rendered his words into English. "I am Elder Thesic. Thank you for responding to our distress call. We did not know this world was inhabited. We would not have come if we had known, but we have nowhere else to go." Dr. Chen's training took over. She introduced herself and her team, keeping her voice calm and professional. But inside she was shaking. This was first contact. This was history. "We need to evacuate your ship," she said. "Our engineers say it won't last more than a day. We're preparing landing sites for your people." Thesic's expression was hard to read, but his voice carried clear emotion. You would do this? Shelter 50,000 strangers? We're going to try, Dr. Chen said simply. The evacuation took 18 hours of frantic coordination. Human spacecraft never designed for this kind of operation ferried loads of refugees down to Earth. The Javari had their own escape pods, but many were damaged. Military transports, commercial jets, even private spacecraft were pressed into service. The world watched on television and computer screens as the alien refugees descended. Landing sites had been prepared in Australia, Kazakhstan, Brazil, Canada, and Kenya. Massive tent cities went up overnight. The Javari stumbled out of their craft into Earth's heavier gravity, struggling with each step. Medical teams rushed forward with protective gear, terrified of unknown diseases but determined to help. Dr. Chen accompanied Thesek to the Australian site. She watched as families emerged from the pods, clutching children and possessions. They looked exhausted and frightened. Some collapsed on the ground, too weak to stand. Human medics and soldiers moved among them, offering water and assistance. Your people are showing us great kindness, Thesek said quietly. We fled our world because it was dying. The ecosystem collapsed after centuries of mismanagement. We were supposed to reach an empty world, start over, make different choices. Instead, we crash into your system begging for help. What will your people do now? Dr. Chen asked. Survive if you let us. We have no way to leave. Our ship is destroyed. We have limited supplies. We are at your mercy. That night, as Dr. Chen filed her report, she learned something that made her blood run cold. The Javari weren't just running from a dead world. They were running from something else. Thesek had mentioned it carefully, testing if humans understood interstellar politics. They were running from the Krellin Dominion. The Dominion was an empire that controlled hundreds of worlds. They considered refugee populations to be salvageable resources, property to be collected and processed. The Javari had fled from Dominion-controlled space, hoping to disappear into the vastness of the galaxy. They thought they had escaped. They were wrong. 3 days after the last refugee landed on Earth, the message arrived. It came in perfect English, translated by computers far more advanced than anything humanity possessed. 3 Krellin warships sat at the edge of the solar system, and their message was simple. The Javari were Dominion property. They had fled from Dominion space with resources and technology that didn't belong to them. Under interstellar salvage law, they were to be returned. Earth had 30 days to load the refugees onto Krellin transport ships. Failure to comply would result in corrective action. Dr. Chen stood in the UN chamber as the message played. She looked at the faces around her and saw fear. Humanity had barely reached its own moon. These were beings who crossed between stars as easily as humans crossed oceans. What could Earth possibly do against that kind of power? But she also saw anger and determination. The Javari children were already playing with human children in the camps. Families were forming connections. Engineers were sharing ideas. In just 3 days, the aliens had become people, not abstractions. The Secretary General's voice was steady. We need to vote. Do we surrender the refugees or do we stand? The Javari settlements were not going well. Dr. Chen walked through the Australian camp on day 47 of the refugee crisis and saw the strain everywhere she looked. Human aid workers moved with exhausted faces, trying to manage a situation that grew more complicated by the hour. Javari families huddled in temporary shelters that were never meant to last this long, their blue skin looking almost gray in the harsh sunlight. Earth's gravity was crushing them. The Javari came from a world with lighter gravity, and every step on Earth was a struggle. The elderly could barely move. Children developed bone problems. Medical teams worked around the clock to develop support equipment, but there were 50,000 refugees and not nearly enough resources. The atmospheric difference was another problem. Earth's air was breathable for the Javari, but just barely. Many developed respiratory issues. The oxygen content was slightly too high. The humidity wrong. The pollen and microorganisms completely alien. Humans had spent millions of years adapting to Earth. The Javari were trying to do it in weeks. Disease became the nightmare everyone feared. 3 weeks into the crisis, a human aid worker in the Kenya camp developed a strange fever. Within days, 12 more humans were sick. The pathogen was alien, something the worker had picked up from close contact with Javari refugees. It wasn't deadly, but it was spreading. Quarantine protocols went into effect. Panic followed. Then a Javari child died from what doctors eventually identified as a modified version of the common cold. The human virus had jumped species and turned lethal. The camps locked down completely. Medical teams in full protective gear moved between the populations, trying to treat diseases they barely understood. Dr. Chen worked with Thesic to establish communication protocols, trying to bridge the gap between human and Javari medicine. The elder had become her closest ally, but even he was struggling. His people were frightened and traumatized. They had lost everything, and now they were sick and trapped on an alien world. Some of my people are saying we should demand resettlement off-world, Thesic told her one evening, his 3 eyes reflecting the camp lights. They don't understand that humans cannot provide this. They think you're keeping us prisoner. Are we? Dr. Chen asked quietly. The Krellans gave us 30 days to surrender your people. That deadline is in 2 weeks. The UN still hasn't voted. Thesic's silence was heavy. They both knew the political situation was deteriorating. The refugees were costing billions of dollars. Every nation hosting camps was feeling the strain. Food supplies were being diverted. Energy grids were overloaded. Local populations were getting angry. The protests started in the 3rd week. Small at first, just groups with signs outside government buildings. But they grew. In Sydney, 10,000 people marched demanding the refugees be relocated away from their city. In São Paulo, protesters blocked supply trucks heading to the camps. The message was always the same. The Javari were not Earth's problem, and humanity couldn't afford to keep them. The media ran constant coverage. Every incident was magnified. When a Javari man accidentally contaminated a water supply with his medication, causing 30 humans to get sick, the outrage was immediate. It didn't matter that it was an accident, that the man didn't understand Earth's plumbing systems. The damage was done. Counter-protests formed too. Groups supporting the refugees, calling for compassion and understanding, but they were smaller and quieter, and they weren't driving the conversation. Then came the riot. It started in the Australian camp on day 63. A group of young Javari, frustrated by the conditions and frightened by rumors of deportation, tried to break through the camp perimeter. They weren't armed, weren't violent, but they were desperate. Security forces responded with tear gas and barriers. The situation escalated. More Javari joined, and then some humans started throwing rocks. Within an hour, the camp was in chaos. Dr. Chen was there when it happened. She saw the fear on both sides, saw how quickly misunderstanding turned to violence. A human soldier was hit with a thrown piece of metal and went down bleeding. Javari protesters were trampled in the panic. The security forces opened fire with rubber bullets, and in the confusion, some live rounds were fired. 3 humans died. 7 Javari were killed. Dozens more were injured. The footage went global instantly. The images of alien bodies lying in the dust, of human blood on the ground, of children screaming in 2 languages. The world watched, and the calls for deportation became deafening. Ship them back to the Krellans, politicians demanded. We tried to help, but they're too dangerous, too expensive, too different. Let the Dominion deal with them. Dr. Chen felt sick watching the coverage. She knew what deportation meant. The Krellans didn't want to resettle the Javari. They wanted to harvest them. Dominion salvage law treated refugees as resources. The Javari would be processed, their useful members enslaved, the rest disposed of. But there were positive moments too, small connections that gave her hope. In the Kazakhstan camp, a human teacher named Elena had started a school for both human and Javari children. Dr. Chen visited one afternoon and watched as kids from both species worked together on art projects. A Javari girl with blue skin carefully showed a human boy how to mix colors in the Javari style. They were laughing together, struggling with each other's languages but communicating anyway. The children don't see differences the way we do, Elena said. To them, having 3 eyes is just interesting, not scary. The technology exchange was happening too, despite the political chaos. Javari engineers, desperate to prove their worth, began sharing knowledge with human counterparts. In a research facility in Geneva, a joint team was working on clean energy systems based on Javari fusion technology. It was decades ahead of anything humans had developed. If we can scale this up, the lead human engineer told Dr. Chen during a video call, we could solve the energy crisis. Not just for the camps, for everyone. This is revolutionary. Water purification was another breakthrough. The Javari had developed systems for recycling water at nearly perfect efficiency, technology they had needed on their dying world. Human engineers adapted it for Earth's conditions. Within weeks, systems were being installed in drought-stricken regions. People who had been without clean water for years suddenly had access. These successes made some people reconsider. Maybe the refugees weren't just a burden. Maybe they brought something valuable. But the political situation was still deteriorating. The Krellin deadline was approaching, and the UN General Assembly was finally preparing for the vote that would decide everything. Dr. Chen met with Thesic the night before the vote. They sat in her temporary office, drinking tea that the Javari could actually consume. He looked older now, worn down by the stress. "What will your people do if the vote goes against us?" she asked. "Some will fight," Thesic said quietly. "Not because we're warriors, but because we're desperate. Most will simply wait for the Krellins to take us. We're too tired to resist anymore." "I'm sorry," Dr. Chen said. "I wish we were better at this. I wish we had more to offer." Thesic reached across the table and touched her hand with his three-fingered grip. "Your people have already given us more than you know. You didn't have to respond to our distress call. You could have let us die in space and no one would have blamed you. Instead, you tried. That matters." The General Assembly vote was scheduled for the next morning. The entire world would watch as humanity decided whether to stand for the refugees or surrender them to save themselves. Dr. Chen couldn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about the children in Elena's classroom, about the engineers sharing technology, about the families on both sides who had started to form connections. She thought about the 3 humans and 7 Javari who had died in the riot, and how their deaths would be used to justify whatever decision was made. She thought about the Krellin warships waiting at the edge of the solar system, patient and cold, and she thought about what it meant to be human, to be part of a species that was facing its first real test on the galactic stage. Would humanity choose based on fear and self-interest, or would they choose based on principles that they claimed to value? The vote would tell her. The vote would tell everyone. As dawn broke over New York, delegates began filing into the General Assembly chamber. Dr. Chen was there in the observer section, her hands clenched tight. Thesic sat beside her, his 3 eyes fixed on the floor below. The Secretary General called the session to order. The debate began, and the whole world held its breath. The General Assembly chamber was packed beyond capacity. Every seat was filled. Every screen showed the same scene, and billions of people around the world watched the live broadcast. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Dr. Chen sat in the observer section, feeling the weight of history pressing down on everyone in the room. The debate had been going for 6 hours. Ambassador after ambassador stepped to the podium, making their case for or against granting asylum to the Javari refugees. The arguments were predictable but passionate. The American ambassador spoke about strategic concerns. "We cannot defend these refugees against a star-faring empire. The Krellin Dominion has technology we can barely understand. 3 warships sit at the edge of our system waiting. If we refuse their demands, they could destroy us. Is it worth risking 8 billion human lives for 50,000 aliens?" The French ambassador countered with moral arguments. "If we surrender these refugees, we are no better than the Krellins. We claim to value human rights, freedom, dignity. Do these values only apply to our own species, or do they mean something universal?" The Chinese ambassador was pragmatic. "The technology exchange has already proven valuable. Javari fusion technology could solve our energy problems for generations. Their medical knowledge could cure diseases. If we hand them over, we lose all of that." The Indian ambassador spoke of practical concerns. "Our camps are overwhelmed. Our resources are stretched thin. The riots showed how dangerous this situation is becoming. We cannot sustain this indefinitely regardless of our intentions." Dr. Chen listened to all of it, her stomach churning. Thesic sat beside her perfectly still, his 3 eyes fixed on the proceedings. She couldn't imagine what he was feeling, listening to beings debate whether his people deserved to live or die. The smaller nations began to speak, and their voices carried different weight. The Kenyan ambassador stood at the podium, her voice clear and strong. "My country hosts 10,000 Javari refugees. Yes, it has been difficult. Yes, we have faced challenges. But I have visited the camps. I have seen Javari children playing with human children. I have seen engineers from both species working together. I have seen what we can become if we choose courage over fear." The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that all people have the right to seek asylum from persecution. I say that all people must include all sapient beings. We must extend our principles beyond our own species or they mean nothing. The Brazilian ambassador agreed. We have faced hardship before. We have welcomed refugees from wars, from disasters, from persecution. This is no different. These are people who need help. We help them. But others disagreed. The Russian ambassador warned of contamination and conflict. The Australian ambassador, still dealing with the aftermath of the riot, spoke about the real costs and real dangers. The Saudi ambassador questioned whether Earth had any obligation to aliens at all. As the debate wore on, Dr. Chen saw the division clearly. The powerful nations were split, concerned about their own survival. The smaller nations, many of which had experienced colonization and oppression themselves, were more willing to stand on principle. But would principle be enough? Finally, the Secretary General called for the vote. The question was simple. Would Earth grant formal asylum to the Javari refugees and accept the responsibility of protecting them? The electronic voting system lit up. Green for yes, red for no, yellow for abstention. Dr. Chen watched the board fill with colors, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The final count appeared on the screen. 118 in favor, 67 against, 8 abstentions. The chamber erupted in noise. Some delegates cheered. Others shouted in anger. The Secretary General had to call for order repeatedly. But the vote was final. Earth had made its choice. Dr. Chen felt tears on her face. Thesik's hand gripped hers tightly, his whole body shaking. The Secretary General read the formal declaration that would be broadcast to the Krellin ships. By vote of this General Assembly, Earth hereby grants formal asylum to the Javari refugees under the principle of universal sapient rights. These beings are now under the protection of humanity. We will not surrender them. It was the bravest and most foolish thing humanity had ever done. The Krellin response came within hours. It was cold and formal. Earth had 30 days to prepare for corrective action. The Dominion would reclaim its property by force if necessary. The world shifted into emergency mode. Military leaders from every nation met in constant session. Scientists and engineers worked around the clock. And the Javari, for the first time since arriving, were asked not just to be helped, but to help. Dr. Chen found herself in a classified briefing room deep under Geneva, surrounded by military officers and Javari technicians. Elder Thesik stood at the head of the table, looking more alive than she'd seen him in weeks. "We can help you," he said. "We're not warriors. Our people abandoned warfare centuries ago, but we have defensive technology, shield generators, energy weapons, advanced materials. We will share everything if it means protecting the world that protected us." "How long will it take to manufacture these systems?" asked General Martinez, the newly appointed commander of the International Defense Force. A Javari engineer named Trelvik brought up holographic displays. "With your industrial base? Weeks at minimum for basic systems, months for anything advanced." "You don't have months." "Then we use what we can build and improvise the rest," Martinez said grimly. "Show us everything. Hold nothing back." The preparation was frantic and desperate. Human factories began producing Javari-designed shield generators, but they could only make a few dozen. Energy weapons were reverse-engineered and mounted on military vehicles. Advanced hull materials were synthesized in small quantities and used to armor critical facilities. But it wasn't enough. Everyone knew it wasn't enough. The Krellin warships were enormous, powerful, and designed for conquest. Earth's defenders were patchwork and improvised, held together with hope and determination. Military strategists developed asymmetric tactics. Earth's orbit was filled with thousands of satellites, old spacecraft, and debris. All of it became potential weapons. Nuclear warheads were mounted on retrofitted rockets. The International Space Station was evacuated and rigged with explosives to become a massive orbital mine. Every trick, every desperate gamble was considered. Commander Yevgeny Volkov, a veteran Russian cosmonaut, was given command of the Orbital Defense Fleet. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defiant, and looked at the ragtag collection of craft under his command. Military shuttles from a dozen nations, converted commercial spacecraft, experimental vehicles that had never been tested in combat. It was laughable compared to what was coming, but it was what they had. The Jvari volunteers presented themselves to military recruiters, thousands of them. They couldn't fight well in Earth's gravity, but they could operate systems, manage shields, coordinate defenses. Despite their pacifist culture, they understood that sometimes survival required violence. Dr. Chen spent her days helping coordinate between human and Jvari forces, translating not just language but culture and intent. The nights she spent with Thesic, working on a desperate diplomatic initiative. They broadcast messages across known space, explaining Earth's situation, appealing for help from other civilizations. The Accord of Sapient Worlds was dissolved long ago, Thesic explained as they worked. But some species still honor its principles. If we invoke the Accord, if we broadcast that Earth has granted asylum and is defending that principle with force, someone might respond. How likely is that? Dr. Chen asked. Thesic's three eyes were sad. Not very. The Dominion is powerful. Most species fear them, but it's the only chance we have. The message went out across multiple frequencies, quantum encoded to reach as far as possible. It explained everything. The refugees, the asylum, the Krellin threat, humanity's stand. It invoked ancient laws and principles that most of the galaxy had forgotten. The response was silence. Days passed. The Krellin deadline approached. Earth's defenders took their positions. Orbital platforms armed themselves. Ground forces deployed to protect the refugee camps in major cities. Civilian populations were moved to shelters when possible. But there were 8 billion people and not nearly enough safe places. Dr. Chen said goodbye to her family through a video call, not sure if she'd see them again. Her mother cried. Her father tried to be strong. Her sister asked if this was really worth it, if 50,000 aliens were worth risking everything. They're not just aliens anymore, Dr. Chen said quietly. They're people we made a promise to. If we break that promise because it's dangerous, then we're not who we think we are. The last day before the deadline, Commander Volkov broadcast a message to his fleet. Dr. Chen listened to it from her bunker in Geneva, and the words made her cry. We're not soldiers, most of us. We're scientists and pilots and engineers. We built machines to explore and discover, not to fight. But today we fight anyway because some things are worth fighting for. Those refugees down there, those 50,000 people who came to us broken and scared, they're counting on us. The whole world is watching to see if humanity can be brave when it costs us everything. So when those Krellin ships come at us, we show them what Earth is made of. The first Krellin weapon strike was meant to break Earth's will. The lead warship fired a concentrated energy beam that cut through space like a blade. 2 defense satellites simply ceased to exist, vaporized instantly. The International Space Station, already evacuated, was hit next. The explosion bloomed in orbit, visible from the ground as a brief new star. Commander Volkov watched from the bridge of the Defiant, his jaw tight. All units engage at will. Show them we're not running. The Earth Defense Fleet scattered into attack formation. It was a collection that would have been laughable in peacetime. Military shuttles retrofitted with weapons, commercial spacecraft with armor plates welded to their hulls, experimental drones controlled by AI. Against the sleek Krellin warships, they looked like children's toys, but they fought anyway. The first wave of missiles launched from orbital platforms, carrying nuclear warheads modified with Jvari guidance systems. The Krellins intercepted most of them with point defense lasers, but 3 got through. The explosions were spectacular but did little damage to the armored hulls. The second wave did better, using the debris from the first as cover. 1 warhead struck the lead Krellin ship's shield generator, causing it to flicker and fail temporarily. Target that weakness, Volkov ordered. Hit them while the shields are down. Railguns fired from ground installations, accelerating projectiles to incredible speeds. The Krellin point defense couldn't track them all. Thousands of tungsten rods slammed into the lead ship's hull, punching through armor, causing secondary explosions. It wasn't enough to disable the ship, but it proved they could be hurt. The Krellins responded with overwhelming force. Energy beams swept through the defense fleet, cutting through ships like they were paper. The shuttle Moscow exploded with all hands. The experimental drone carrier Unity broke apart, spilling its payload of attack drones before they could launch. Commander Volkov watched 12 of his ships die in the first 5 minutes of combat. But Earth's defenders had planned for this. Thousands of old satellites and pieces of space debris had been fitted with small thrusters and guidance systems, turning them into improvised mines. As the Krellin ships advanced, they ran into clouds of debris moving at orbital speeds. The impacts were small individually but constant. Shields flickered under the barrage. Sensors were damaged. The Krellin formation had to slow down and spread out. "They're adapting," Volkov's tactical officer reported. "Adjusting their point defense to handle the debris." "Good," Volkov said grimly. While their looking at debris hit them with everything else, the battle became chaotic. Human ships darted in and out, firing missiles and energy weapons, then retreating before the Krellins could lock on. Swarms of automated drones attacked from multiple angles, overwhelming targeting systems. It wasn't elegant or sophisticated, but it was effective enough to slow the Krellin advance. On the ground, the real terror was just beginning. The Krellin's second warship broke away from the fleet battle and moved into low orbit over Africa. Its mission was clear: land troops and secure the refugee camps. If they couldn't force a surrender, they would simply take what they came for. Drop pods began falling from the sky over Kenya, each one carrying Krellin shock troops. They were massive beings, nearly 3 meters tall, covered in powered armor that made them look like walking tanks. They hit the ground running, energy weapons already firing at anything that moved. General Martinez coordinated the ground defense from a bunker in Nairobi. He watched the battle feed and felt his stomach sink. His soldiers were brave and well-trained, but they were fighting enemies with superior technology, superior armor, and superior firepower. "Deploy the shield generators," he ordered. "Javari units, activate now." Across the battlefield, Javari technicians activated the portable shield generators they had helped build. Shimmering energy barriers appeared, stopping Krellin weapons fire. It wasn't perfect. The shields failed under sustained fire, but it gave human soldiers precious seconds to return fire and maneuver. The Battle of Nairobi was brutal. Krellin shock troops advanced through the city, their armor shrugging off small arms fire. Human soldiers used anti-tank weapons, explosives, anything that might penetrate the armor. Javari volunteers operating from protected positions coordinated the shield generators and provided targeting information. Dr. Chen watched the battle feeds from her bunker, feeling helpless. She saw human soldiers fighting beside Javari technicians, saw both species bleeding and dying together. A Krellin soldier fired into a group of defenders, killing 2 humans and a Javari in a single burst. The survivors didn't retreat. They charged forward with grenades and determination. In orbit, Commander Volkov was running out of options. Half his fleet was gone. The debris fields were clearing. The Krellin ships were adapting to every tactic Earth threw at them. He made a decision that he knew would cost him everything. "All ships fall back to secondary positions," he broadcast. Then, on a private channel to his bridge crew, "Everyone except essential personnel, evacuate to the escape pods." "That's an order." His executive officer stared at him. "Sir, what are you planning?" "Something stupid," Volkov said with a grim smile. "Something that might actually work." 10 minutes later, the Defiant broke from the defensive formation and accelerated directly toward the lead Krellin warship. The Krellins initially ignored it, treating it as a desperate suicide attack that their shields could easily handle. They didn't know that Volkov had overloaded the ship's fusion reactor, turning the entire vessel into a massive bomb. The Defiant struck the Krellin ship's shield at full speed. The reactor went critical. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface, a brilliant flash that lit up the night sky. When the light faded, the lead Krellin warship was crippled, its engines destroyed, atmosphere venting from massive hull breaches. It began to drift, no longer combat effective. Commander Volkov and 200 crew members who had refused to evacuate died in that moment. But their sacrifice changed the battle. The remaining Krellin ships were suddenly vulnerable, their formation broken, their confidence shaken. On the ground in Nairobi, human and Javari forces counterattacked. They had studied the battle footage, found weak points in the Krellin armor, concentrated fire on joints and sensor arrays, explosives planted under their feet. It was brutal, close quarters combat, and both sides took heavy casualties. A Javari technician named Velta found himself face-to-face with a Krellin soldier after their position was overrun. He was a peaceful being from a peaceful culture, but his hands found a fallen weapon and he fired without thinking. The Krellin fell. Velta stood there shaking, realizing he had just killed another being. A human soldier pulled him back to cover. "Don't think about it now," the soldier said. "Think about it later. Right now we survive. The battle raged for 2 more days. The second Krellin warship, unable to secure the refugee camps against determined resistance, began orbital bombardment. Energy beams struck Nairobi, destroying buildings, killing thousands. But the defenders held. They dug in, they adapted, and they refused to surrender. The remaining Krellin ships in orbit faced constant attacks from Earth's defense fleet. The humans had lost most of their ships, but those that remained fought with desperate courage. They couldn't win, everyone knew that. But they could make the Krellins pay for every meter of space they took. Dr. Chen worked in a field hospital converted from a school building, treating wounded from both species. The injuries were horrific: burns from energy weapons, crushed limbs from building collapses. She watched doctors and medics work beyond exhaustion, saving who they could, comforting those they couldn't. Elder Thesic found her there on the 3rd day of battle. His robes were covered in dust and blood, and his 3 eyes were haunted. "Our quantum beacon is still broadcasting," he said quietly, "but no one is coming. The galaxy is watching us die and doing nothing." Dr. Chen wanted to say something comforting, but she was too tired and too honest. "Then we die standing up. That's better than living on our knees." That night, the situation became desperate. The Krellins prepared for a final assault, gathering their remaining forces for one overwhelming push. Earth's defenders were exhausted, low on ammunition, running out of time. Victory was impossible. The only question was how much longer they could hold. Then, just before dawn on the 4th day, something impossible happened. The sky filled with new ships, not dozens, hundreds. They arrived in formation, emerging from faster-than-light travel, their hulls bearing markings from species Dr. Chen had never heard of. The largest vessels were enormous, dwarfing even the Krellin warships. A broadcast echoed across all frequencies, translated instantly into every Earth language and Krellin military codes. The voice was ancient and powerful. "This is the Velastri Coalition, speaking for the assembled species of the Accord of Sapient Worlds. We have observed the Terran defense of refugees granted asylum under Accord principles. We have observed courage in the face of overwhelming force. We have observed a species that chose principle over survival. The Accord has been invoked. The Krellin Dominion is ordered to withdraw immediately or face collective response from all Accord members." On the Defiance wreckage, a surviving crew member activated a backup transmitter. 5 years after the Battle of Terra, Dr. Sarah Chen stood on a hillside overlooking what had once been the Australian refugee camp. The temporary structures were gone now, replaced by something extraordinary. The settlement below was neither human nor Javari, but something entirely new. Buildings rose in flowing curves that mimicked Javari architecture, but they were built with human materials and engineering. Gardens mixed earth plants with Javari food crops in combinations that worked better together than either species had managed alone. She could see children playing in the central square, blue-skinned and pale-skinned running together without thought to their differences. A human teacher led a class under a tree, while Javari students and human students sat together, struggling with each other's languages but learning anyway. It was normal now. The children who had grown up in this blended world couldn't imagine it any other way. "Still thinking about the early days?" Elder Thesic asked, joining her on the hillside. He moved easier now in Earth's gravity. His body adapted after 5 years. Medical advances developed jointly by both species had helped. Treatments that strengthened Javari bones and muscles while teaching human immune systems to recognize Javari pathogens as harmless. "Always," Dr. Chen admitted. "Sometimes I can't believe we survived. 30,000 humans dead, 8,000 Javari, and for what? To prove a point? To prove that civilization means something," Thesic corrected gently. "Your species could have surrendered us, saved themselves. Instead, you showed the galaxy what principle looks like when it costs you everything." Dr. Chen knew he was right, but the weight of those deaths still pressed on her. She wore the memorial bracelet that every veteran of the Battle of Terra carried, engraved with random names of the fallen from both species. Today, her bracelet showed Commander Volkov's name and that of a Javari technician named Relvin, who had died holding a shield generator position in Nairobi. The world had changed so much in 5 years. The immediate aftermath of the battle had been chaos. Cities damaged by orbital bombardment had to be rebuilt. Thousands of wounded from both species needed long-term care. The dead needed to be honored. But slowly, painfully, the healing began. The technology exchange accelerated after the battle. HFY fusion technology had been scaled up and deployed globally. Energy was now cheap and clean, transforming economies overnight. The climate crisis that had threatened humanity for decades was suddenly solvable. Fusion plants replaced coal and oil, emissions dropped, and Earth began to heal. Medical advances were even more dramatic. Studying HFY biology led to breakthroughs in regenerative medicine. The techniques they used to adapt to different worlds became treatments for human genetic disorders. Human pharmaceutical knowledge combined with HFY bioengineering created cures for diseases that had plagued both species. Life expectancy for both humans and HFY increased by years. The joint engineering projects were changing Earth's skyline. The first true starships were under construction in orbital shipyards, combining human manufacturing techniques with HFY drive technology. They wouldn't be colony ships, not yet, but they were real spacecraft capable of traveling to other star systems. Humanity was becoming a spacefaring civilization. Dr. Chen walked down into the settlement with Thesic, heading toward the community center. Today was the 5-year anniversary of the Battle of Terra, now celebrated as Unity Day across the planet. The celebration was bittersweet, honoring the dead while celebrating what their sacrifice had built. The community center was packed when they arrived. Humans and HFY filled the space wearing ceremonial clothes from both cultures. Dr. Chen saw Elena, the teacher from the Kazakhstan camp, talking with a group of her former students who were now teenagers. She saw engineers who had worked together developing the fusion technology. She saw soldiers who had fought side by side in Nairobi, their wounds healed but their memories intact. General Martinez found them in the crowd. He was retired now, working as a consultant for the joint military forces that Earth and the HFY maintained together. The Krellin Dominion had not forgotten humanity's defiance, and intelligence suggested they were still planning future action. Earth needed to remain ready. Every year this ceremony gets bigger, Martinez said. More people remember. More people understand what happened. My fear is that people will forget the cost, Dr. Chen said. That they'll remember the victory but not the price. That's why we keep reminding them, Martinez replied. He gestured to the memorial wall that dominated one side of the center. 38,000 names were engraved there, human and HFY mixed together with no distinction. The wall listed them alphabetically by sound rather than by species, so that human and alien names appeared side by side. The ceremony began with a moment of silence. 38,000 seconds of silence, one for each person who died. It lasted over 10 hours, but everyone stayed. They took turns standing vigil by the memorial wall, reading names aloud. Dr. Chen read for an hour, her voice steady even as tears ran down her face. When she read Commander Volkov's name, she remembered watching the Defiant explode. When she read Velta's name, she remembered the HFY technician who had killed for the first time to protect humans he barely knew. After the vigil, the speeches began. The Secretary General spoke about unity and sacrifice. The HFY Elder Council representative talked about humanity's courage. But the speech that mattered most came from an unexpected source. A teenager walked to the podium, a human girl named Maya who had been 12 when the battle happened. She had lived in Nairobi during the fighting, had survived the orbital bombardment, had watched her neighborhood destroyed. Now she attended a mixed school, her best friend a HFY boy named Trelvin. I used to hate the HFY, Maya said, her voice carrying through the silent room. When the bombs fell, when my house collapsed, when my father died defending the refugee camp, I hated them. I thought it was their fault. If they hadn't come here, my dad would still be alive. She paused, looking at the memorial wall. But my father didn't die because of the HFY. He died defending them, and that was his choice. He chose to stand between refugees and death. He chose to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And now I understand why. Because civilization isn't about being safe. It's about being decent. It's about standing up when standing up costs you everything. Maya's HFY friend joined her at the podium, putting his 3-fingered hand on her shoulder. My mother died in that same battle, he said. She died operating a shield generator that protected human soldiers. She could have run. She could have hidden. But she chose to fight for the world that had protected us. Both our parents made the same choice, and because of them, we're standing here together. The room was completely silent. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone was on their feet. applauding the two teenagers who represented everything the battle had been about. Dr. Chen found herself crying again. But this time, they were better tears. This was why they had fought. This was what 38,000 people had died for. A world where species could stand together, where children from different worlds could be friends, where difference wasn't something to fear but something to celebrate. After the ceremony, Dr. Chen met with the Velastri Coalition's ambassador, a being from a species called the Veltari, who looked like a cross between a mantis and a dolphin. The Coalition had remained in contact with Earth after the battle, formally inviting humanity to join as junior members. "Your species has proven itself remarkable," the ambassador said through a translation device. "Most civilizations develop space travel first and ethics later. Humans developed ethics while barely capable of leaving your own world. The Coalition is honored to count you among us." "We're still learning," Dr. Chen said honestly. "We still have conflicts. We still make mistakes. There are still humans who want the Javari to leave, who think we made the wrong choice." "That's natural," the ambassador replied. "Perfection is not required for civilization, only the willingness to try, to stand for principles even when it's difficult. Your species has demonstrated that in ways that resonate across the galaxy." The political situation had stabilized over the 5 years. The Javari settlements were now permanent communities with full legal status. Javari citizens had the same rights as humans in the nations where they lived, and increasingly they were integrating into human society. Some chose to remain in the blended communities. Others moved to human cities, starting businesses, attending universities, forming families. Mixed couples were becoming common, though reproduction between the species wasn't possible due to biology. But families formed anyway, adoption and blended households creating new definitions of what family meant. Dr. Chen knew a human couple who had adopted 3 Javari children orphaned in the battle. She knew Javari families who had taken in human war orphans. Love and family transcended species barriers. The economic impact had been transformative but challenging. The clean energy revolution displaced millions of workers in fossil fuel industries. The medical advances made some human pharmaceutical companies obsolete overnight. But the new opportunities created by joint human-Javari enterprises absorbed most of the displaced workers.